On a moonless night in October 1860, the steamboat St. Nicholas cut through the dark waters of the Savannah River when suddenly armed men emerged from the cargo hold. Not river pirates, but enslaved people who had stolen weapons and were now pointing them at the white crew and passengers. "Turn this boat around," commanded their leader, a man known only as Isaiah. "We're going to freedom, and anyone who tries to stop us dies tonight." What happened next became one of the most daring and violent episodes in the secret history of American slavery. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past, which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. Before we begin, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Savannah River, forming the border between Georgia and South Carolina, was both a commercial highway and a potential escape route for the enslaved. By the late 1850s, as tensions mounted toward the Civil War, the river had become a flashpoint, a liquid border that promised freedom to those brave enough to cross it and death to those who failed. What made the Savannah River escapes unique wasn't just their audacity, but their methodology. Unlike the celebrated Underground Railroad journeys northward, which relied on stealth and assistance from abolitionists, the Savannah River escapes were often armed rebellions in motion, violent confrontations where enslaved people seized weapons, commandeered boats, and fought pitched battles against their pursuers. The violence began escalating after John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in October 1859. Southern slaveholders tightened security, but paradoxically, this created new opportunities. Enslaved workers now had increased access to weapons as plantations stockpiled arms. In March 1859, 7 months before Brown's raid, a group of 12 enslaved men from the Grimble plantation near Savannah executed a meticulously planned escape. They had spent months stealing ammunition, hiding it in false-bottomed rice barrels. Their leader, a blacksmith named Caesar, had secretly forged crude weapons in his workshop. On the night of March 14th, they broke into the plantation's gun room, arming themselves with hunting rifles and pistols. When the overseer confronted them, Caesar shot him in the chest, the first shot fired in what would become a running gun battle down to the river. They commandeered a flatboat and began rowing toward the Atlantic Ocean, planning to reach a British ship rumored to be sympathetic to runaways. A posse of 20 white men pursued them in faster boats. What followed was a 4-hour chase down the river, with both sides exchanging gunfire in the darkness. Contemporary newspaper accounts, which dismissed the escapees as murderous insurrectionists, nevertheless recorded the deadly effectiveness of their resistance. 3 members of the posse were wounded, 1 fatally. The escapees finally ran aground near Tybee Island, where they scattered into the marshlands. 9 were eventually captured after a week-long manhunt. All 9 were hanged publicly in Savannah's Johnson Square, their bodies left on display for 3 days as a warning. But 3, including Caesar, were never found. Rumors persisted for years that they had reached a British merchant vessel and made it to Nassau. The Grimble escape wasn't isolated. Records from the Savannah Harbor Master's office, plantation correspondence, and newspaper reports reveal at least 17 armed escape attempts via the Savannah River between 1859 and 1861. What's remarkable is how the tactics evolved. Escapees began targeting specific vessels, particularly smaller steamboats and package ships that made regular runs. They would sometimes arrange to be hired out as temporary dock workers or boat crew, giving them inside knowledge of schedules and layouts. In December 1859, 4 enslaved stevedores working at the Savannah docks managed to smuggle themselves aboard the River Queen, hiding among cotton bales. When discovered 2 hours into the journey, they emerged armed with stolen revolvers and a shotgun. They forced the captain at gunpoint to continue downriver toward the ocean. A passing Confederate revenue cutter spotted the hijacked vessel and gave chase. Rather than surrender, the 4 escapees dove overboard, swimming toward the South Carolina shore, while bullets churned the water around them. 2 made it to shore, but were captured within days. The other 2 drowned. Whether from gunfire or exhaustion was never determined. By October 1860, With Lincoln's election looming and sectional tensions at a breaking point, the most dramatic escape attempt occurred. Isaiah, the man who would lead it, was a hired-out, enslaved carpenter who worked on various vessels. This gave him extraordinary mobility and knowledge. He spent months recruiting, finding 8 other men willing to risk everything. They secreted weapons aboard the St. Nicholas over several weeks. A knife hidden in a timber pile, 2 pistols wrapped in oilcloth and tucked behind loose planking, powder and shot concealed in a hollowed-out tool handle. On October 23, 1860, all 9 men were aboard legitimately, some as cargo handlers, others as maintenance crew. 2 hours after sunset, as the boat steamed toward Savannah, they made their move. Emerging simultaneously from different parts of the vessel, they took control with stunning speed. Isaiah held a pistol to the captain's head. 2 others secured the engine room. The remaining 6 covered the 12 white passengers and 4 crew members. "We don't want to kill anyone," Isaiah reportedly said, according to later testimony. "But we will if we have to. Take us to the ocean." For nearly an hour, they controlled the boat, forcing it to reverse course and head toward the Atlantic. Passengers and crew were locked in the cargo hold. But one crew member had escaped notice, a young deckhand named Thomas Whitfield, hiding in a lifeboat. Whitfield worked his way to the steam whistle and began blowing distress signals. On shore, plantation owners and river patrols heard. Within 30 minutes, 3 boats were in pursuit. Realizing they couldn't outrun their pursuers, Isaiah and his men made a desperate decision. They ran the St. Nicholas aground on a muddy bank and fled into the coastal marshland with their weapons. What followed was a 5-day manhunt involving over 100 armed men and tracking dogs. The escapees split into 3 groups to maximize their chances. 3 were captured the first night, caught in a rice field. 2 more were taken the following day, wounded by gunfire. 1 died from his wounds before reaching jail. Isaiah and 3 others remained at large. Reports placed them in various locations. Some said they'd stolen another boat. Others claimed they'd been helped by free black mariners. Still others insisted they'd died in the swamps. The truth emerged slowly. 2 were eventually captured in Florida 3 months later, trying to board a ship to Cuba. They were returned to Savannah and executed. Isaiah and 1 companion, a man named Samuel, simply vanished. No confirmed sighting, no body, no closure for their former enslavers. 50 years later, in 1910, a fascinating letter appeared in the Savannah Morning News. An elderly black man, writing from Ontario, Canada, claimed to be Samuel. He wrote that he and Isaiah had indeed reached a British ship, had made it to Halifax, and had lived as free men ever since. Isaiah, he claimed, had died in 1887 in Toronto. The letter was dismissed as a hoax by some, but the details it contained, names of overseers, descriptions of the boat's interior, and accurate accounts of the escape, suggested authenticity. The Savannah River armed escapes represented something profound. Enslaved people's willingness to use violence not in hopeless rebellion, but as calculated resistance with specific tactical objectives, escape and freedom. The escapes terrified slaveholders because they demolished the myth of the contented slave and revealed the constant threat of armed resistance. In response, river patrols doubled, weapons were secured more carefully, and enslaved people's movements were restricted even further, which only increased resentment and the likelihood of future escape attempts. When the Civil War began, many of the tactics pioneered in these escapes, like nighttime movement, coordinated actions, use of waterways, armed resistance, would be employed by formerly enslaved people joining Union forces. The river that had been both highway and barrier, both promise and threat, had taught its lessons well. Freedom, for those who traveled its waters in the darkness, wasn't bestowed or granted. It was seized at gunpoint if necessary, through blood if required, and always at the highest possible cost. What do you think about the slave strategic successful revolt? Drop your comment and don't forget to subscribe.